Hi guys, so two interesting pieces here on GB News. One where farmers post-Brexit have launched a request for a UBI, Universal Basic Income, in order to fill the gap in the subsidies they used to get from the EU, but now have pretty much disappeared following Britain's exit. And the second is a British farmer who's complaining that this isn't the Brexit that he voted for, and is still pushing the Nigel Farage line of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels making decisions. Oh, and he thinks that the extra costs at the border will somehow protect British farmers. Have a listen to this.
Now, British farmers have launched a campaign to demand universal basic income for agricultural workers. It's a bid to improve financial security in the sector.
Well, before Brexit, farmers were heavily reliant on EU subsidies, but now the government are having to replace this with other schemes.
Well, according to a new report, the systems won't actually plug the gap that's going to be left as part of the transition.
And it would have been much more helpful if Mr Poots, as former First Minister of Northern Ireland, had actually told the truth to Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage that leaving the European Union would be devastating for farmers.
Look, they already knew that. They didn't care. So it wasn't a requirement on Edwin Poots to explain how leaving the European Union would be terrible for farming and explaining this to Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. They already knew that. They just didn't care.
And for fishermen, fisherwomen, I've got lots of stats, I'm sure Mr Fairley has as well, that it's just devastated export markets. We've lost all the subsidies. And believe me, the gentlemen of Whitehall don't give a monkeys about farmers. Europeans did. So perhaps we could just have our farming industry back in the EU and all will be better. But the number of people on farms has declined dramatically. The investment isn't going into farming. But I was in France, sort of a seaside resort, a bit like Brighton, if you like, over the Easter weekend with grandchildren. And their supermarkets put local produce at the front of the stall. They really promote French food. Does Asda do that? Does Tesco do that? Does Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer's just across the road from here in GB News? No. And we should do far more to support our farmers in Britain like they do in the continent. But you won't find a Tory minister who's interested in looking again at this. This is the worst failure of Brexit. There are many other failures, but this is the worst one. And you're right to say it's cost us great damage, and I don't know if anybody's got the guts to try and put it right.
And he's correct. When I looked around here in Italy as well, they have this concept of chilometri zero, which is 0 kilometers. So it's about promoting local produce for environmental reasons, but also for cultural reasons.
James, we are almost out of time, so just last word to you.
Yeah, just on that, what you're saying there, Dennis, doesn't really back up being in the EU, because actually what we're doing is we're making it harder for imports to come in from the EU. So we are supporting British farmers.
How is that supporting British farmers? Now, this isn't the UK government deciding what we're going to do is we're going to carry out checks and impose costs on EU exporters or imports to the UK because we want to support British farming. It's a requirement. They have to do it if they don't want to have problems with the WTO. Now, how is this going to help British farmers? Like, if we're talking about certain produce that's produced in Britain and is being imported, yes, in a sense, it may help British farmers to a certain extent. But for produce that's not produced in Britain, then how is that going to help British farmers? Like the importation of bananas. Bananas are not grown, as far as I know, in Britain. So the extra cost is going to be applied to those. How is that going to help British farmers? But it's not going to help British farmers in other ways, because it's not just food we're talking about. It's pretty much everything. So equipment, parts for tractors, fertilizer, chemicals, all of these things are going to become more expensive because a lot of them have to be imported.
We have more British produce on the shelves now. What we have to stop is the imports from Australia and New Zealand of cheaper lamb and beef.
Okay, but it's like, if the UK had been a member of the European Union, it would have been part of this trade deal that the EU signed recently with New Zealand, which I covered in another video, which is actually beneficial to the European Union, beneficial to EU farmers. EU farmers have been protected. Have UK farmers been protected in the UK-New Zealand trade deal? Of course not. It was about getting something, just to hold up a piece of paper in Parliament, to do a bit of a victory lap. See, Brexit is succeeding because we have a trade deal. Don't actually look at the trade deal. Well, unfortunately, New Zealand farmers have, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. We also saw the embarrassment of UK produce being blocked from entering New Zealand, or was it Australia? In either case, it's a problem. So this is not helping British farmers. If the UK had remained, certain produce would have been protected in the trade deal. Unfortunately, with the UK-New Zealand trade deal, it's not. And we're seeing produce come from New Zealand, which is undercutting British farmers.
That's a bigger issue. They're not even part of the EU. I mean, we don't want to get run by people in Brussels telling us how to farm our land here.
Here we go. This is the fundamental problem here. We're once again having people who are regurgitating absolute rubbish from the likes of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. We don't want to be told by Brussels what to do. Okay, if you want to export your produce into the single market, then you're going to have to do as Brussels tells you. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to export. This comes back to this problem that I raised in another video. Why did these farmers vote for Brexit? What was going through their minds? Now, a lot of farmers realized this would be a mistake. It would be terrible for them. And they decided, look, we're not going to support Brexit. But unfortunately, a lot of farmers, and I presume this guy as well, I don't know if he was old enough to vote for Brexit, but this guy as well, it's people like him, bought the line from Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage has no understanding of farming, has no understanding of exports or imports, but these people believed him anyway. The experts were saying, don't vote for Brexit because it's going to impact your industry. And they said, no, let's listen to Nigel frigging Farage.
That just doesn't work by self-elected people.
Poor Aussies. Oh, poor New Zealanders.
The Aussies and the New Zealanders are benefiting from the UK government throwing farmers under a bus. And here you have a farmer who seems to be happy under a bus. How do we reach out to people like this? How do we communicate to them that it was a mistake? How is it pride? Is it ignorance? Is it, I just don't want to accept reality? What is it? What do we have to say to convince him? Does he have to look around and see farming collapsing and then realize, well, actually it was a mistake? Look at farming in the European Union. As I pointed out, there are issues. Yes, certainly. There's a massive farming lobby in Europe that is pushing back against environmental change, environmental regulations, and we've seen them on the streets. The issues in British farming and EU farming are different. Some of them are connected. But when it comes to the subsidies, the EU farmers are still getting a lot of subsidies while the UK farmers are not. And the protests are different. But I really don't understand how at this stage somebody can sit there and talk about unelected bureaucrats and think that in some way that the UK government cares about farming. It doesn't. The Tories used to believe that, well, we have this voting bloc locked in. They're always going to vote for us, so we don't actually have to do anything because they're never going to vote for Labour. And now we're seeing farmers switch to Labour because they realise the Tories just don't give a crap. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.